Hello again, everyone. Today I wanted to show you my swatch book where I'm keeping acrylic ink and paint samples. So this notebook is a Chic Sparrow Dark Maverick in the extra wide. I purchased this off of a buy-sell trade group, I would say about a year and a half ago now. The extra wide is not a size that Chic Sparrow currently carries, but you could do this same setup if you wanted to replicate what I have in here with just one of the notebooks I have in here instead of two. But I'll go into that a little bit more when I go into the notebook itself. So I just did want to show you the lovely texture on this Dark Maverick here. You can still get classic Mavericks from Chic Sparrow, but you cannot get the riveted pen loop. So it would be without that option. This is an extra wide with the riveted pen loop. Otherwise, essentially a classic. And once again, you'll notice lots of fountain pen ink on me today. I've already washed my hands a few times. Let's just say I had a rather frustrating fountain pen experience today. This is a little bit more ink than I would normally have on my hands. Let's just say that. So anyway, let's dig into this. So this elastic is probably going to need to be changed in the near future because it's losing its elasticity just because I think it's getting old. I assume this notebook is fairly old. I don't know the exact date, but I would assume a few years because they stopped selling the extra wide, I think, a few years ago. So I have two notebooks in here. One is a Moleskine, and then one is a Palomino Blackwing notebook. And I forget what size this is. I think it's the medium size that they carry, whatever that's called. I'll find that out and put a link down below. Of the two of these, if you were going to just use one, I would highly recommend going with the Palomino Blackwing notebook. The paper is far superior, in my opinion, to the Moleskine. The Moleskine paper is very thin, and this particular one is off-white, which I don't particularly like. This one is white, which I'll show you when I get in here. And this paper will hold pretty much any media, handles fountain pens well. I would say that the paper is a little bit like a Rhodia paper, if you're familiar with that notebook. Again, paper is a very big personal preference kind of thing. So if you prefer Tomoe River or something like that, this might not be your ideal paper, but it depends on what you're using it for. I think it works on just about everything that I've tried on it pretty well. When it comes with a Blackwing pencil, which is a really long pencil with a flat eraser on the end. I don't have it handy, but you'll see it when you go to the link for this if you do. So, and these are both notebooks that fit in a wide size notebook. I just have both of them together. Both of them will not fit in a regular wide size traveler's notebook. I have tried and they do not fit, but only one will fit, but you could probably include a couple of smaller insert size notebooks as well, or at least one. So in this first one, I have ink samples. And when I first started this was started quite a while ago. I put fountain pen ink samples in here as well. This paper is not good for fountain pen ink. I carried on with that way too long in this book and it just really didn't work well. So you'll see in here I've put brackets around all of the fountain pen ink because I have done separate swatching in a Tomoe River notebook for those fountain pen inks. I'll put a link down to that swatch book below, or where I go through that swatch book in a video. But you'll see them in here, but I've stopped doing that. I tried my best, but it just wasn't working. So the majority of what this is going to be used for from now on, and has been used for in addition to fountain pen inks, is the acrylic inks that I have, and some watercolor inks, I believe. I am going to go past this first page, even though it has the index on it, because it does have some personal information on there. So I'm just going to flip through here so that you can see. I do have an index in the front that tells me what's where in here. You'll see the off-white nature of this paper. It seems like it would be fairly sturdy, but it really absorbs a lot of ink. I think it works fine for acrylic ink. What I did with these samples is I put the full strength acrylic ink on with a brush and then I diluted it out with some water over here. And you'll see with the water, it did kind of seep into the page. But this is enough, this is good enough to tell me what the color is and how I can, what I can expect from those colors. And then this is done with a dip pen, because I also do use acrylic ink with a dip pen for drawing sometimes. So I'm just going to flip through and tell you what these are. So this is a Liquitex acrylic ink, and I believe, yeah, I have another page there. This is Daler Rowney acrylic ink, and there's a few pages of those. Amsterdam acrylic ink, I don't have a lot of those. And if for those of you that don't know, acrylic ink is like acrylic paint. That's essentially what it is. It is acrylic paint, but it is severely, not diluted, but more liquid. And it's not more diluted because generally they keep a high pigment load in the ink. So it's not being diluted, you just have a medium that is the vehicle for your color that is much more liquid than a regular acrylic paint. So here you'll see some fountain pen ink, and this is Noodler's as well, which is really notorious for feathering and bleeding through already with regular paper. So here it was just kind of a disaster. I started that at first, and then I thought, oh, well, maybe it's just Noodler's ink. Yeah, well, it wasn't. So this is Sennelier shellac ink, and I'm not sure what the binder is in this shellac ink, but I really prefer this actually to acrylic ink. It has a really nice shiny texture when it's done drying, and it works really well for dip pens. So again, brush technique here with just full strength brush and then watered out. I think the brushiness here is really due to the paper and not necessarily a quality of the shellac ink. Oh, and I should show you that someday. I gave my husband a really cool birthday gift one year where I got him a book where everyone is supposed to put their signatures in the book and then fold over the signature so that they have a so-called ghost signature. It's based on a book that I heard about from the early 1900s, but it may have even been earlier, where people would do that at parties and stuff with their dip pens. So I might show that sometime because it's a really fun idea. But the ink that I used for that mostly was this shellac ink because it really worked well. It lies a little thicker on the page, so when you did essentially like the Rorschach thing with your signature, it really worked well of mirroring the signature. So it was really nice. And then here we have some Dr. P.H. Martin's acrylic ink. I have a few sets of those. I think 3 sets? Yeah, 3 sets of those. And then here was just various inks. So I put some fountain pen ink, and a lot of my inks I got from my sister-in-law's grandmother when she was downsizing her house and just didn't want to keep all of her art supplies. So we got a lot of acrylic ink in that, and some of them were unlabeled. So, and a lot of the older inks that I have in my collection are from her. So here, like, I really don't know what these are, but I at least wanted to have some sort of representation in a book so that I could see what they look like. And you can see, like, this green one, oh my goodness, that bled a ton. When I did the samples, I did put a sheet of paper in between so that it would not bleed onto the other page. Usually that worked, but it didn't always. Okay, and then there's some concentrated watercolor ink, Higgins waterproof ink, Dr. P.H. Martin's concentrated watercolor. A lot of these were from my sister-in-law's grandmother. And then here's some Schmincke acrylic ink. I only have these 3 because I just wanted to get 3 primaries to kind of play around. And it's just been sitting around waiting for me to do that. So again, this is more various ink. And here I tried to have a more opaque sample here with the platinum lavender black. It did work a little bit better, I think partially because it is an iron gall ink. I believe that's what it is. And it has a different viscosity than regular ink, but it still was not working very well. And all of these, you know, I just kept it up because I would accumulate only 1 or 2 at a time, and I didn't want to have a separate book. And now I have so many, I kind of need a separate book. Okay, so these are Sennelier abstract acrylic inks. These are a couple of inks that I got in Switzerland when I was traveling there. I went to an art supply store when I was there that was just full of really fun things, but we could only take a few things back because we were trying to travel light. And again, you're going to see here several, so I did fountain pen ink samples in here. I figured the ink samples, since they were just samples, it would be okay in here. And I just kept going. I think I did all of these in one session. And I think this TWSBI fountain pen ink was kind of the last straw. I was like, well, this isn't even workable. This is not good. So that was kind of the last straw. I tried one more from my Inkvent calendar, and that's kind of when I decided to make a whole separate book, because this just wasn't working. Okay, and this is some calligraphic ink from J. Herbin. And I think that's the last thing I have in here. So this is all inks. And from here on forward, it's just going to be acrylic inks or things similar to acrylic inks. This book, the Palomino Blackwing Notebook, has mostly acrylic paint samples, but at the beginning, which I'll show you here, I'm going to go past the beginning because I do have some personal information on that page as well. So what I did was I put all of my watercolor swatches from Daniel Smith that are in this 238 colors to try set of 4 sheets. I cut them and put them in here because I wanted some place there where there would be an easier reference for those, because the sheets themselves are fairly large and I was having a hard time finding out where to keep them because they were just too large to keep anywhere else. And I think on here I was trying to mark which colors I have, but that has probably not been updated in quite some time. So this first part is just all of these Daniel Smith watercolor samples that I swatched out, just cut out. And I tried to put them in some sort of color order, but they might not necessarily be in that great of a color order. And you can get these swatch sheets, I think, for around $20, either through Amazon or a art supply store or an art supply store online. They generally all have them. And it's kind of nice to be able to swatch them all and see which watercolors you might want to get. So other than those in the front, everything else is acrylics. So these are Liquitex soft body acrylics, and a lot of these were ones that I inherited from my sister-in-law's grandmother. So some of them, the pigment has separated. I'm not sure I can use these really. They don't smell rancid or anything, so I don't know if there's harm in still using them. For these samples, I really just squeezed the tube a little bit, put the tube right at the end there, and then smeared across so that I wouldn't have to dirty a brush or anything to do that. And this is Liquitex heavy body paints, golden tube acrylics, and it's harder to see the interference colors. Interference colors are kind of interesting. Daniel Smith has some, and it's watercolors, but I've never used them. But I have used interference inks in acrylics, mostly with jelly printing, because if you print it on top of a black paper, for example, you'll get this beautiful shimmer of the color, like interference violet. It basically has, so interference violet, you're going to see the violet in the shimmer, and then when it goes flat, you see a little bit of its complement here, which would be green. And the same is true for all of the other interference colors. There's a lot of theory on how to work with interference colors when painting landscapes and ocean scenes and all kinds of stuff. I am not the person to ask about that stuff. I'm just kind of playing around with those. But just know that they're a thing, and they're kind of different from regular paint colors. And here's just some various brands. These are Liquitex Basics, which are actually really good acrylics for being a student grade paint. If you're ever going to do any acrylic pouring, for example, I would recommend starting with Acrylic Basics because they're inexpensive and you're going to use a lot of paint with acrylic pouring. If you haven't heard of acrylic pouring, there's a ton of videos on YouTube about acrylic pouring. I would say Google it. I'm not going to go into that now. I probably won't do anything like that on the channel just because it is so messy and it requires a pretty large space. But I have done it. It's kind of fun when you just don't really want to have a plan for something and you want to play with paint. But it's not something that I do regularly. Okay. And then these are golden fluid acrylics, golden high flow acrylics. So the fluid acrylics, I think it's the fluid, I forget if it's the, maybe it's the high flow, that are essentially acrylic ink in bottles. But they don't come in little ink bottles. They come in actual paint bottles, but they're the same viscosity as an acrylic ink. But I chose to put them over here. Okay, we have some Sennelier acrylics, and these were the kind of neon colors for golden high flow acrylics. And that's it. So I have a lot of pages left. I'm not sure I will be accumulating too many more acrylic paints. So I might end up putting different media in here eventually. What I might end up doing is consolidating these two and just putting the inks in here because they're probably going to show up a lot better on this paper, quite honestly. But this is the way I have it for now. I created this one a long time ago and just haven't had the time or the will to go back and re-swatch all of those swatches. So I'll just go into what pen I have in here real quick. This is a Copic multi-liner. If you've seen some of my video setups for things like this, you've probably seen this Copic multi-liner before. This is the 0.5, and this one is also dedicated to this notebook to label things in here. And sometimes though, even though these, I have several Copics dedicated to different traveler's notebooks for where I'm keeping inventory, if I do need a drawing pen, I will sometimes take them out of these and use them for that. I just have to try and remember to put it back, which I'm not always the best at. But if I am traveling around, I don't necessarily want to use the Copics because I don't want to lose them. So instead I will use the Sharpie pens, which essentially are the same kind of thing, but you know, if I lose one, it's not a big deal. So this is definitely putting this, even this extra wide, to the test here. It's pretty much a perfect size for these two notebooks. But like I was saying, if you want to have a similar setup with a wide notebook, you could do it with just one of these hardback notebooks. And you'll see here I have the, there's 4 strings total in this notebook, and I have 2 strings in between the front and back cover of each book. And that seems to work pretty well to hold them in here. But again, these elastics that are in here are pretty soft because they're older, and I probably should replace them. Although I must say that the holes on the older notebooks for where the strings go are much, much smaller. I just recently restrung an older Chic Sparrow notebook, and it was a bear to replace the elastics because the holes were so small. So that might be another part of the reason why I'm avoiding that to date. All right, so that's that. I think with this, that might be all of my swatch books, because I think at this point I've shown you all of my other swatch books that I have for art supplies. It's kind of a fun exercise, and sometimes it's nice just to gather all your supplies and use them in a way where you're cataloging them and you can go back and look at them when you want to do an art project later. I find that I waste fewer materials that way, and I also am less likely to duplicate materials. Because sometimes I'll just get excited about a project and say, oh, I need this, 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 this. And then if I have them cataloged, I can go back and say, do I actually have those things? And if I do, I'll use them. Because art supplies are meant to be used and not hoarded, although I do not always apply. That's not always the way I handle it, let's just say. All right, well, that's it for today. Feel free to like and or subscribe, and see you next time. Bye.